Welcome to the Mindful Money Podcast. This podcast is a weekly exploration into a new philosophy of money through psychology, philosophy, and practical wisdom. In this episode of the Mindful Money Podcast...
So trying to noodle it, trying to figure it out is not always the best approach. Sometimes the best things in life show up when we simply get out of the way.
All right, welcome everyone to this week's episode of the Mindful Money Podcast. I am so excited to welcome a longtime friend, international speaker, author, thought leader, specializing in advanced human sexuality and relationships. Good friend of mine, Michael Russer. Welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Oh, thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate all that you do that we're going to get into in a few minutes here. But first, I want to ask the question I ask everybody on the podcast. And it's this. What is your belief around money, what it and what it represents? And how has that changed as you've evolved as a person?
Well, let's start in my earlier years. I'll be turning 65 in January, and in my late teens and early 20s, I fully expected to be a millionaire by the time I was 30, and I could easily have been one if I stayed in any one particular career. It was not hard for me to make money. Money was easy for me. I made a great deal of money, and but here's the kicker. It never fulfilled me. That was not the driving force. The reason for making money was to somehow finance whatever my sense of purpose was going to be, whatever that was.
And you had this early on. You had this sense of purpose.
Since I was a young kid, I always felt that sense of purpose, just not knowing what it was. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't hard for me to make money. I'm not saying that and trying to be any way braggadocious, but I'm a high energy individual. I got a fairly high social intelligence. I knew how to start businesses and run them and work with people, sales and marketing. So, I cannot tell you how many different businesses and careers I had. And then, and typically when I went from one to the other, I would make considerably more money. So I in my earlier years, I kind of went from selling real estate and jumping from that to something else very quickly because I found it very boring, but I made a lot of money doing it. Mm-hmm. And then I eventually went into, started a mortgage consulting firm here in Santa Barbara after I got married. And that was very successful until it no longer fulfilled me. And I really ended up hating it. And so we just kind of shut it down. And then I took 2 years off to really figure out what I was here for. And that was when I was, I did that when I was like 41 doing that. And I had 2 young kids, a house and a mortgage and a wife, and it's expensive living in Santa Barbara, and we were dedicated to putting them through private school. So it was a ballsy move, but I had that kind of confidence, and I said, I'm going to figure it out. We weren't independently wealthy, but we had a fairly good cash cushion to last us a couple of years. And it took the full 2 years. And I knew from that process, I needed and wanted to be a speaker. And I remember showing up at the, and I wanted to hone my skills. I remember showing up at the local Toastmasters, which happened to be club number 5 out of all the clubs that were ever started. Santa Barbara had Club 5. It was a tiny little club. And they asked me, well, what do you want to, what are you here for? And I says, I'm here so that I will become an international speaker. And of course, they give me that, oh, yeah, sure. Okay, that's nice. And within 2 years, I was. And so I, within a couple of years, I started speaking and quickly went international and built a very nice niche for myself and started making mid to upper mid 6 figures. And But again, when you're raising a family and in a fairly expensive place like Santa Barbara, there's never enough. But the thing is I remember pulling down, in some cases 20 grand a day.
Wow.
And my average one year was over 50,000 a month. And there was no satisfaction in that. It was like, okay, fine. Now what's next? So my relationship with money is kind of unusual in that it was never a pursuit in and of itself. It was simply a means to an end. And what I realized is it doesn't matter how much I made, if I wasn't feeling fulfilled in what I was doing or how I was showing up. Back then I thought it was all about the doing. Now I know different. But it just simply wouldn't fulfill me. However, my speaking, I knew I was on the right track because I did get a deep sense of fulfillment in doing that. It's just that my topic, which happened to be technology, which I'm interested in, you and I talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
I have a passion for it, but passion and purpose are not necessarily the same thing.
So, and I heard you light up when you started to talk about how you needed and wanted to be a speaker. What made that pivot for you? How did you come to realize your purpose and what that money could be used for?
Well, I didn't at that time. I just knew that was one of the contexts, probably the context that would eventually allow me to feel that sense of fulfillment. And I really wanted to do speaking about transformation, human transformation, but I didn't have the story to talk about then. It was very frustrating. I had gone through a number of different transformational events in my life, including, retiring from that previous company and taking the risk of, okay, I have no idea what's next. And I've got maybe 2 years to figure it out. And I worked hard during those 2 years doing that. And then, I hadn't discovered my purpose then, but I discovered the context that would serve my purpose eventually. And that's an important distinction, at least for me. And so I, when I had my previous businesses, it was just natural for me to get up in front of people and share some of the innovations and some of the unique solutions we had for our market. And I really enjoyed that. And so that, but I'm one of the few people I know that actually went through the entire What Color's Your Parachute book, which is about, I don't know how many, 1,000 pages.
It's a long book.
And, it's a very big book. And I did pretty much every exercise in that book. And and it was very helpful. It was very helpful, but you got to be dedicated to do that.
Absolutely. So I also heard you speak earlier about when you were making six figures, you made a joke. You made it like a joke, but I heard you say in Santa Barbara, there's never enough. And one thing that I find continuously with the people that I talk to in the program and who aren't in the program is their behavior reflects a belief that there isn't enough. So, and it's, it's from something as simple as they go to a store and they look at a price and their eyebrows go up, or they say, hey, I'm never going to be able to afford a thing, instead of when can I? So the difference in the language is huge. So would you say that that's shifted for you, that you've noticed any of that? And is there?
Oh, yeah, since then. Oh, absolutely. Since then. Yeah. Back then it was all about, we paid cash for everything. And other than the house, we bought the cars cash. We, went on trips cash. Everything was cash. Mm-hmm. And both my wife at the time and I were very fiscally conservative, and so it was like we were always living from the perspective that scarcity, right? It was like, oh my God, well, what happens if? So we better make as much money now and so you're always living in the future, which was, God, it was awful.
You spoke to taking the risk earlier too.
Yeah.
Seeing an echo there.
Yeah, so taking the risk, You mean shifting careers, you mean, that risk?
Well, I mean, that's what you were talking about it as, but what I'm hearing as well, there's this undertone in what you're saying about how, you were fiscally conservative, everything was cash, but you were still living from a perspective of what happens if whatever. But you went through a transformation where you took a risk to say, I have no idea what's next. And one could apply, and in my program, I try to apply that same thing for people to money. Like, it's like this belief that, oh my God, I don't have enough, and this panic mode, this fear of the unknown, that once they start to embrace and realize that they've always been okay, then what happened for you when you did that, for instance?
Well, that's another long story. So I stayed in that career for close to, I don't know, 15, 18 years, and it served us very, very well. Um, and then, you know the story. 5 years ago, I ended a 26-year marriage and literally jumped into the abyss of the unknown, way more than I ever had before. And I walked. I not only did I end a marriage, I knew I would lose most, if not all, the friends associated with that marriage. I walked away from my career because I said enough. It's not serving me, and I gave most of my wealth to my ex-wife because she does not have the ability or the willingness to make that kind of money. And plus, that way, instead of dividing up the house and all that crap, I said, you know what? I want the kids to have something because it's going to be very difficult. I mean, your average home prices here are well over $1 million. And, you know, my kids are not entrepreneurial where I was and continue to be. And to afford that kind of thing, you better be entrepreneurial or win the lottery or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, I walked into the abyss and I had a good sized 401k, but it's dwindling, and it's been 5 years now. And my position is so interesting. I wake up in cold sweats a lot, but I tell people, and I mean this so sincerely, to the deepest part and core of my being, I wouldn't trade my life now for any other time ever. Because the sense of fulfillment, the sense of peace that I have inside, that is not affected by the circumstances, is so profound, despite the fact that I still struggle financially, which is something I've never had to deal with before.
Yeah.
And it's because I will not compromise now on my principles. I will not compromise on my work and just do something just for the money.
Yeah, and an earlier guest on the podcast actually said that money is just the manifestation of values, different values, and you're not going to compromise your values now for your money.
No,
and
so so it's financially, I'm in the most uncertain of places I've ever been. And then of course, I have existential uncertainty too. As you know, I have 2 forms of ongoing cancer, and my family, no one's made it before. So, I'm hoping to change that trend. But despite those uncertainties, I am actually a very happy fellow, and the work is starting to show promise. People are bringing us out to speak, and my partner and I. And it's a tough field when you talk about sex and intimacy in this culture. It's like, oh my God, I want to hear about it, but I don't want anybody else to know that I want to hear about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's your world. That's what you talk about.
Yeah, we actually, a bigger picture actually, Chris, is showing up fully open-hearted and being the person you came into this world already as, but as life happens, we hide it. And so that's the biggest aha. And one of the contexts happens to be sex and relationship because our story is so unique. As you know, I'm a clinically impotent male, and yet my partner, who's female, and I have profound and extraordinary emotional, physical, and even what we call spiritual intimacy. So much so that we've written a book that's now been 3 years in the making, and now people are bringing us out to speak from all over the country, and it's a powerful story, and it's a hero's journey story, but it's we love it. We love this process. It just. Yeah, but the money is not as forthcoming right now as it was. But I, aside from, oh my God, am I going to get kicked out of my place or anything else like that? Aside from those kind of thoughts, we don't, it's not like God, if I don't have tons of money in the bank, I'm gonna somehow not make it. And it's
So
so
it's
interesting.
changed a lot from before, is what you're saying.
Tremendously, yeah. Well, the other thing too, and I have to say, this is a big deal, especially for men. When you have kids, and you have other people that you are responsible for, that is something. Now, if I still had kids that I had to be responsible for, I would be losing a lot more sleep right now.
Mm.
But that changes a lot of things right there. That's one of the reasons we included that as a chapter in the book. And it's a powerful motivator. It really is. And kudos to my ex-wife for having the faith in me to literally walk away from a very successful business and the mortgage consulting business and take 2 years off, not knowing what's next. And meanwhile, we have 2 young kids, and but I knew one way or another I was going to pull it off. So, but it's.
So I want to just pause you there for a second, because you're cresting this ridge of I mean, you've painted a picture for us already about how your transformation was you taking a leap, walking into the abyss. You didn't know what would happen, and now you have this sense of fulfillment and peace. Yeah, but you have the least money. What would you say to the least money you've had? You've mentioned that, yeah.
I don't understand the question.
Right now, I'm getting to the question. So I'm saying your broad stroke has been this this transformation that you've had, and you don't have as much money as you used to, and there's guys out there that have this calling like you did and might have a family, and I just want to pause and ask you, what advice would you give those guys from your experience and the advice you've already written in your book?
Yes. Okay. If they have that sense of calling and want to manifest their sense of purpose, which, by the way, I just want to clarify something. Purpose for me is how I show up. Mission is how it's manifested in my doing. I used to chase purpose as it was a rainbow. You know, the closer you try to get to it as a doing, the more it moved away. And the moment I shifted that perspective,
really
wise. Yeah. And the moment I shifted that perspective, it changed everything in terms of purpose. Now I am living my purpose. Anybody can live their purpose in an instant, because if they see it as a state of being rather than a doing. And so that's how I see purpose, as a state of being. And, you know, I can't add anything more than what I came into this world as. And that's one of the reasons I have a picture of me at 4 months old with the arms spread wide open and a big smile, and world, I am here.
Yeah.
And that is and I actually show that photo to practically every audience I speak to, because they can relate to it. We all came in that way, and then life happens, right? And we start shutting down, and we start losing who we start forgetting and hiding from who we really came into this world as. And so I don't see myself able to add anything to that. It's always much more of a process of what more can I remove in terms of the barriers to allowing that to shine forth.
Wow. I think that's. It was funny. Just the other day, I found this article on minimalism, and that's exactly what it was. It's not having anything. It's just getting back to the essentials, which a lot of people forget. So how do we do that? Like, what could you suggest for us to do that? It sounds like you've gone through this journey yourself.
Multiple times. Yes. Well, the thing is to become as clear as possible as to who you are. And this is going to take quiet time, which means removed from all distraction, the willingness. And this is where I think a lot of people, you need to learn to become intimate with yourself. And no jokes about anything there. I'm talking, intimacy is a connection here, meaning deep connection at the heart level. And we've identified in the book 3 things that have to happen. First, you have to allow yourself to be vulnerable. And I'm not talking about physical existential vulnerability where you allow physical threat to potentially do you in. I'm talking about the emotional vulnerability where you're willing to feel everything. See, most of my life I spent avoiding those feelings, and that literally blocked or inhibited my ability to actually it inhibited my earning ability. I could have, instead of six figures, I could have easily made seven figures a year.
Wow.
But because I was so shut down that way, and it's easy. Actually, it's quite easy to be successful in business and still be very shut down. I mean, we're witnessing this already, and unfortunately, in so many ways. And so the willingness to feel everything, including the things that we don't like feeling, and there's no one-way valve for feelings. There's no way to just feel good stuff and avoid the stuff that doesn't feel good. Feelings are feelings.
Yeah.
And they're just that. They're just feelings. And so the willingness to feel.
Can't shut part of the water off there.
No. So the willingness to feel everything, and then that's vulnerability. Then the willingness to be authentic, meaning show up with no pretense whatsoever. Be exactly who you are, warts and all, if there are any, and everybody has them, and communicate exactly and authentically is what's on your mind, even if it means you feel the need to say something that might not be well received by even people that are very important to you. And then finally, and this was the big one for me, the willingness to remove all that armor I had put around my heart for all those years and allow my heart to be absolutely wide open and willing to send and receive love unconditionally. And that was absolutely the biggest. That right there was like an overnight shift. When I did that, people who had known me for most of my life did not even recognize me. They said,
"Wow,
who are you and what'd you do with Michael?" And not only did it radically change my physical appearance, I also show what I used to look like before this transformation, literally months before I made this choice.
I love that.
And
picture,
I looked like my dad.
Wow.
And now I'm turning 65, but now people, I had somebody to say, and when I told them what my birthday was, says, "Oh my God, I thought you were in your late 30s." I says, "Well, you made my day." And so it's, to remove all that from our hearts. And the reason we put that stuff there is because when we're so young, despite the well-intentioned efforts and of family members and parents and church and culture and schools, because we're so young, we don't have the cognitive or emotional intelligence to discern between a truly physical existential threat, which we are wired to avoid, and a wounding of our emotions, our ego. And once we develop an ego, which doesn't happen right away, but once it does occur, then that sense of false self becomes very, very fearful, very needy. That is the thing that wants to be, fed all the time. And so I think one of the most powerful contexts Jacqueline, my partner, and I ever came up with is the distinction between the ego and the heart meaning the metaphorical true essence of who we are.
Right.
And that voice in our head, that's the ego. The fears that we feel, that's the ego feeling that. The pain of rejection or oh my God, she devastated me, or he broke my heart. That's all the ego.
And the ego makes the armor, really.
Yes, the ego. Well, yes, the ego forges the armor to protect itself, and it's a losing battle. It will never, ever come to terms with itself. It was so interesting. Jacqueline and I, just for fun, attended this little free workshop on relationships and intimacy. And one of the leaders who had been doing this work for years, as we go around the room, she said, she says, one of the things I want to learn more, get better at, is learning to love myself more. And that didn't even compute for me.
Wow.
because that's like saying you're okay and I'm okay, but we're the same people saying it, right? And it's the ego trying to come to terms with itself. When you're looking at other context, it doesn't even make sense. It doesn't even compute. So context, which is another way of saying, it's a fancy way of saying underlying belief systems.
Yeah, the
I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying it's true, but let me put it this way: it's a hell of a lot more empowering than I am that voice in my head. I am.
Yeah, it's recognizing that the programming is the programming.
Yes, exactly. And then, so the question is, who's doing the recognizing? That's the true essence of who we are.
Right.
The awareness of that programming is the true essence, because that awareness, which we call the heart, is it's not affected by any of those things. And so this is very empowering. So my typically, speaker long-winded answer is learn to become vulnerable, be willing to feel that pain and to feel everything, whether it's good or not so good. Show up authentically and communicate authentically, and perhaps the most important is find a way to pull down that armor from around your heart and allow your heart to really shine, to send and receive love unconditionally, no matter what the circumstances. And then have the faith and the trust that with that process, and of course, use all your other tools, your God-given intelligence and your thinking things through and problem-solving ability. But within that context, you are going to be, at least this has been my experience, I have found that is a powerful way to move forward, retain one's sense of integrity and no compromise, and feel incredibly fulfilled, regardless of what your circumstances are, including financial circumstances, and then have faith that those circumstances will turn around with persistent effort. And so one of the reasons, there's two reasons why Jacqueline and I travel the country and speak pro bono to the cancer survivors. First of all, that's part of our mission work. I mean, we're part of that community, and secondly, it gives us gets us a lot of exposure. And so, on one of those trips that we talked about before we went on the air here, I had somebody reach out to me and now wants me to speak to the medical community for fee. So, all right, I can do that. And we got the book coming out, but we're giving the book away to the cancer survivors, right? And so where that leads, I'm not sure, but I have this deep underlying faith that it is in the right direction. And here's one other thing I want to share.
Sure.
I personally think that the best things in life begin a couple of ways. Number one, there's this expression, breakdown, breakthrough. And so when things seem at the worst, you're probably at the threshold of a tremendous breakthrough. And that's number one. And having the faith that we don't have to figure it all out. That probably the best stuff out there that's coming our way hasn't even shown up on the radar. So trying to noodle it, trying to figure it out is not always the best approach. Sometimes the best things in life show up when we simply get out of the way.
I like that. Wow. That's really powerful stuff. That's I'm going to be thinking about that for a while, because what you've just said is that you get in touch with whatever's going on in your heart and you follow that and just trust that that'll work. And now you're not going to be stressing about the money or about the limitations or whatever. And in fact,
you'll still be stressing. You'll still be, trust me, the ego is always there. You can't eliminate the ego, but the awareness of it. I wasn't kidding when I said I wake up in cold sweats. I do. And it's not just because of my cancer treatments. That's part of it. But the thing that triggers it most all is the fear. Bang, that fear. But it's just a wave. And that's kind of how I look at it now. Okay, it's coming in a wave. And you know what? I found that of course, when you're laying in bed, you're essentially, it's like, holy, holy shit. You can sleep it out. But it's like, God, I'm just laying here, man. It's coming for me. And then as soon as I get up and put myself into action, and ideally with a full sense of awareness of what action you're taking that's consistent with everything I just talked about. Appropriate action in the service of your purpose is the strongest antidote to fear I can think of.
You said something earlier too about trust and trusting.
Trusting, yeah, trusting. And
one point I try to make to people is that, and I think I mentioned this earlier, you've always been okay. So even if you don't think you're going to be okay, you've made it, and you will figure it out because that's what you do as a human being.
Yeah, it's and what's coming our way may end up being far better than what we were hoping for. I have a friend who just the other day was telling me about his friend who's worth over $100 million, and he wakes up every morning absolutely red-faced, furious.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, he's got no worries financially, but he's got to be one of the unhappiest people there are.
Yeah.
And so now I don't mean to say that, oh, geez, if you have a lot of money, you're going to be miserable. No, there are people who make a lot of money who are having a hell of a good time. But after a certain point, that's not what it's about. The thing is, I think part of the reason money is such a charged topic, is first of all, it does relate. It's one of the tools, one of the things we use for maintaining a certain existential equanimity. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And secondly, it is in our culture especially seen as a measure of one's worth. And that is perhaps one of the most damaging and in inhibiting things you can think, because there will always be somebody worth more than you. It's a trap that the ego sets, and it's a big one. It's a bear trap.
Oh yeah, it's a means of comparison.
Yeah. Anytime you catch yourself comparing, you're already in deep trouble. But the fact that you caught yourself, you can pull yourself back out of that quagmire, that quicksand.
That quagmire. So that's a great segue into the last question that I ask people here on the show. It's actually a really good one. So what kind of world would we be living in if money as we knew it never existed?
That is a great question, and one I've given some thought to. I think for some people, it would be fabulous, because I assume you mean if money didn't exist because all of our basic needs were taken care of. Is that what you're...
Sure, that could be one way of looking at it. Really what I'm getting at is we, in today's society, in today's time and space that we live in, we've assigned money certain merits in our life. So, right. And they serve certain purposes. And so if we stripped that away, what kind of world would be left?
Well, again, I'm assuming you have where, basic survival needs and comforts are taken care of at that point,
right.
Kind of like a Star Trekian society.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the way I see it. I think we're really at the cusp of a massive shift in what's going on with the human species, and more and more people are waking up, and those that are waking up would find that as a tremendous opportunity to express their sense of purpose without the fears and anxiety associated with, oh God, I got to make a living because otherwise I'm going to die. Just part of this is I'm just not going to make it, right?
Yeah,
and so that would free them up. Now, the ones who are not, who haven't quite woken up yet, this is like, what? Huh? Well, what am I going to do all this time? Am I just going to have fun? Or I'm just going to do this? And they, I think, would go into a massive crisis because they haven't defined really who they are, other than outside of doing stuff or keeping themselves distracted. So I think what you would see is interesting. This is just sort of coming to me. This segmentation of society, the haves and the have-nots, but it has nothing to do with money. It has to do with sense of the haves are the ones who have come to terms with who they are, and they're expressing that purpose in whatever way works for them. The have-nots are not the ones that are not somehow surviving well. They just don't. They're feeling lost because distraction will never, ever fill that hole that's unfillable from that perspective. And so you end up with a different kind of existential crisis. One of, well, if it isn't for me striving for a living, providing for my family, which is a very 50s and earlier kind of context,
yep.
Where men especially got a sense of purpose and value from doing that. When that's no longer there and they haven't woken up to who they really are, who they came into this world as, I think that's going to cause a huge problem. And I actually thought about this, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago. I says, at some point, this is going to happen. And we are on the cusp of that. Think about it. All the automation that's about ready to happen, artificial intelligence, robotics, you name it. Pretty soon, human labor and human thought and creativity is going to become not the way to do it.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have that shift where, basic survival, basic needs are met, and then hopefully a wave of awakening so that people don't have to feel that angst of, well, if I'm not here to produce and whatever, then what am I here for? And that's, I think, so I see kind of the existential haves and have-nots, but it's available to everybody.
Right. I was just actually about to touch on that. Is what I'm really hearing behind what you're saying is then the means to pursue your passion, it becomes readily available, and it's just a matter of choosing it.
Yeah. And by the way, I do make a distinction between passion and purpose because
you do. You've said that before.
I have lots of passions, but purpose and my mission on that can be scary as hell. And where passion is, I love checking out new technology, new breakthroughs. That's it's like mind candy for me, right?
Yeah.
But and it's a passion. It always was. That's why I could be a successful technology speaker. But my purpose, that comes from a different place. And that comes from deep inside. And my sense of purpose and mission and that sense of awareness. Purpose and awareness, I think, are pretty much almost equivalent.
Awesome. Well, I feel like we could keep talking for hours, but we're coming to a close here. So I just want to take a few minutes and thank you. I'm so honored that you're here on the show and that you were able to, and that you chose really to go deeply with us and really connect to the hearts of the people that are listening, and give them some things that they can do to change their lives. Where can people find you? And I know you have a new book coming out, so maybe you want to speak.
Yeah. Well, the book won't be out until January. But the book's title is Return to Sex and Intimacy for Cancer Survivors and Their Partners. And it's been 3 years in the making. We've been writing this really about 3 years, but it's finally getting there. And yeah, thank you. And it's a joint effort. Could not have happened without my wonderful partner. And the best way to find me would be on my speaker site, I think, which is michaelrusserlive.com. Michael, Michael, Russer, Russer, live, live.com.
You've been listening to the Mindful Money Podcast. Podcast for people who want to align their money with their values. Love this show? Head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review. Want more incredible show content? Head over to mindfulmoneypodcast.com for show notes, past episodes, and a sneak peek at what's coming next. In next week's episode of the Mindful Money Podcast.
But it's more about recognizing that not everything needs to be so materialistic, and when you take off that layer of materialism, you realize there's a greater reason why we're all here is to better each other.